You see, I get in these moods where things come to me, and I just don't know how to process them anymore. It just comes in a big tidal wave at the worst possible moments, when I'm in the shower, when I'm driving in the car, and I got no time to just pick one of them thoughts and just stretch it out and analyze it and break it down and fucking get it recorded so that it can be remembered and passed on. Why do you think it's so important, the thoughts in your head? Why do you think other people need to know? It's some sort of secret mission, like I'm an undercover plant. I'm like the Manchurian candidate of this shit. I wonder what the word is. The one to make me snap. The one to turn my switch. So that I become what you always meant for me to be.
We must have a high tolerance for chaos. Learn to embrace the flow.
Forgive all that we can't forget. Regret nothing we can't let go. For despite what we have learned, infinitely more we do not know.
So let us tune our frequencies
until new vibrations grow. Let's pretend that it never ends.
And now, it's time to start the show.
Let go.
Very nice. I just pressed record so we can just get right to it.
Where were we loosely off last time?
Oh my god, where were we last time? Well, I'll give you an introduction, but ladies and gentlemen, oh, what happened? I can edit anything, don't worry.
Oh, I know. That's the wonder editing and production.
Yeah, and it looks like the levels are okay. I'm assuming this is going to come as clear as it did last time. So, Mr. Anthony Oliver, you asked me where we were last time. I mean, we were all over the place. I don't even know where to begin.
I know, but we left off on a specific thought thread. You don't remember where we ended it, huh?
I'm not sure I remember what I did yesterday. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, I don't remember what I did 5 minutes ago.
Exactly. When you're in the moment, like, there's only this moment, so...
But see, that's a good place to pick it up. Something I was pondering the other day, the paradox of how every moment is individual, yet implicitly intertwined and imbued in every other moment. I mean, this moment you're in right now is just a byproduct of every other moment coming before it.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's just a stepping stone to every other moment that you will achieve after it. And so, there is only this moment, but there is only this moment smeared through every other moment.
Right, exactly. Are you familiar with morphogenetic fields?
I'm sorry?
Morphogenetic fields, are you familiar with that?
I think so. That's kind of like loosely like organized electromagnetic type fields that have to do with consciousness and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I think something like that.
Well, as I understand it, and I'll probably butcher it, but the idea is
Butcher away.
yeah. Well, the idea is that that objects have memory and have this sort of field that crosses over through generations and through time, so that, like, what was the experiment they did where like a parent would be afraid of something and the child would be, let's say they're afraid of spiders, and then the child is born with that fear of spiders, even though they didn't have any actual experience or imprint that would make them afraid of spiders. It was passed on through the parent.
That would be more a case of potentially genetic memory, and epigenetics, which you're starting to find out are a lot more dynamic than we've previously thought, which starts to explain evolution a little more realistically, because up until now, evolution still doesn't make sense, because the idea that, you know, a being can interact and choose to alter its genetics over time in an ecosystem doesn't really work without the real recent notion of like the epigenetics and epigenetic triggers, which is more, I think, what the example you use, but I think like the morphogenetic field thing, because isn't his name Drunvalo McKeeseldeck talk about these things a bit?
Well, I'm not sure if Drunvalo does, but I know the theory of morphogenetic fields come from what's his name? Stanley Krippner?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, my bad. It's Rupert Sheldrake.
Bone of what you're talking about. Well, no, I mean, I just want to jump in here because, like, I don't know specifically about morphogenetic fields. I'd have to go look it up from what it sounds like, because I've heard a few different ideas. But, I mean, to really cut to the bone of the conversation, really, you have to think of it like this, in my opinion at least, that, you know, if you've looked at, and through my studies I've found, ancient wisdoms, spiritual systems, mythologies, sciences, and the cutting edge of modern science all seem to lean towards this simplified way of looking at things that kind of explains morphogenetic fields, epigenetics, epigenetic triggers, which is, you know, whatever everything comes from and is made of is not only hyper dense and hyper stable, but it is also hyper intelligent by our human terms. And whatever that thing is, you know, if you just know any bit about any science, you know, anybody with any, like, you don't have to be a PhD, just any relative understanding of cosmology and atomic science and all of these things, you start to see that there's clear indicators that there is some form of intelligence, so to speak, driving the bus when it comes to the evolution of the universe itself. So we're not even talking about just biological evolution. Biological evolution is the product of whatever energetic evolution that is occurring. I mean, if you apply to the Big Bang Theory, I mean, you start with a big mass of raw materials that constantly evolve and complexify and diversify into the different, you know, elements that we have today, and then those turn into planets, and those planets therefore breed more complex compounds, and therefore eventually, you know, biological life. But there's a pattern there, right? What's the pattern? The pattern is some form of intelligence. So, like, back to the morphogenetic field that you're talking about, like, again, I don't know specifically what it is, but, I mean, if there's intelligence driving the bus, I mean, that everything is kind of made of this intelligence. So, therefore, you know, a morphogenetic field, as you're calling it, or the ability for, like, anything as simple as an atom to have memory, like, or some sense of consciousness that, you know, again, we tend to, as I've seen, and I've done this myself, but I've seen as a human condition, is we try to humanize things, like the concept of what people call God, or call intelligence, or, you know, emotions, like, you know, like when talking about animal intelligence and behavior, you know, people talk about animal emotions, and animals have emotions very similar to mine and yours, but they're not human at the same time. You know, they're not humanized, and I think that's a real stumbling block at times is, like, so I'm using this term intelligence right now, and a lot of people are like, but like an atom can't think, but there's something intelligent, quote unquote, driving it.
Well, I like to call it
what it is. We don't know, but
I like
it's
to call it,
and it's in everything.
I like to call it awareness.
And so this quote unquote morphogenetic field is a really good example of, like, yeah, I think objects have memory and intelligence and the ability to adapt, and that is a transferable thing.
I like to call intelligence awareness. I mean, intelligence is a very human concept, and we use it, but I like to think of it as awareness, and that's consciousness starting at that lower level of atoms or basic elements and then increasing in complexity. Yeah, it's increasing intelligence, but really what it is increasing awareness. It's consciousness becoming aware of itself.
Yeah, there it is.
But I need to make a correction, because the theory was actually proposed by Rupert Sheldrake.
Okay. And you looked it up as we're talking here?
I looked it up. I mean, it's not a great explanation on Wikipedia here, but it's just, in developmental biology, a morphogenetic field is a group of cells able to respond to discrete, localized biochemical signals, leading to the development of specific morphological structures or organs. The spatial, and this is the key, and temporal extent of the embryonic fields are dynamic, and within the field is a collection of interacting cells out of which a particular organ is formed. See, what I like about the theory of morphogenetic fields is that it accounts for temporal. Like, it's, like, I always think of it this way, like, when you look at your ancestors, right, and your father, your grandfather, and great-great-grandfather, that's all the same, that's the same consciousness manifesting generation after generation, like a spectrum. It's a spectrum of consciousness. It's like I'm separate from my grandfather. In a real sense, I am the continuation of the consciousness that's embedded in the genetics. Does that make sense? What I'm saying here?
Well, yeah. I mean, consciousness is really, we are a protrusion of consciousness from whatever that central consciousness is through these objects. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know if it would make sense to others, so simply so, but to me, it's like back to the idea we started this conversation off with, a momentary nature, how it's individual yet interconnected. It's the same thing, like how an individual in a bloodline, in a family line, in a culture, in a society, just, like, to think of it this way, like, you think of yourself as very separate individual from, like, physically from almost everything else in the universe, right? Like, I know we have this conceptualization of, like, you and I do, that we have an interconnectedness to everything, but when you just step back and look at it from a material aspect, like, you feel very, 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 very separate from everything.
Sure.
But if you really get down to it, even in a material sense, you are interconnected with everything. Just by the sheer fact that, you come from everything that has happened in the universe. Again, proposing that we apply the Big Bang Theory here. There's the Big Bang, and then the development of everything that led up to the development of you, which you are made up of. What is the song line? We are stardust?
Yes.
We are 6 million year old carbon or whatever. You are, literally made up of stuff that has been around for eons and has evolved and taken many transmutations. So in that quite literal sense, you are interconnected with everything else in the universe.
Exactly.
Yet, on another scale, when you look at it, you're like, I feel so separate. And it's that same kind of thing that we're seeing over and over again, because now, okay, this thing obviously is a, like, condition of reality. So now you back to what you're saying, morphogenetic fields and, bloodlines. Like, yeah, your grandfather, your father, are just the cutting tip of a spear of evolution.
Right, exactly.
To really put it simply.
Exactly. It's like
and that's the thing, that cutting tip of the spear is you, And the shaft is everything that's come before you, but it's like a tree that's growing, it's like constantly growing up and yet never really loses its body and more develops below it.
That is the exact, you see, this is why I love talking to you, because you articulated it perfectly. That's exactly what I was getting at, and that is the underlying premise behind the morphogenetic fields. But anyway, you mentioned the Big Bang. I'm not sure I buy the Big Bang theory, and I'm not talking about the show. I'm just talking about the actual theory. I don't know. It just strikes me as like science is very limited in what it can explain and what it can understand, and just this idea of our universe, started from an infinitesimal little tiny dimensionless point and then expanded outward, and they can't explain what came before it and was there time before. I just don't know if that's exactly how our universe was created. I mean, maybe there was a Big Bang that was like a bubble in the multiverse that created our universe, but I don't know. There's just something about it that just seems incomplete.
Well, there's a bunch of things with that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Number one, our universe could have been created from something else, kind of can potentially be real, but what if, let's just go out on a limb, what if our universe has just always existed, and it always will exist?
Sure.
Okay, but yet it's always being created. Okay, see, the Big Bang Theory kind of proposes there is this momentous event and everything is here and entropy is taking place and everything's just kind of flying outward and like for momentum, but entropy's constantly applying towards it. Problem is even in a vacuum, I don't know if you know thermodynamics or anything like that,
yes,
but
yes, rudimentary basic knowledge, but
I'm just gonna put it out there just in case anybody who's listening doesn't get it. Entropy basically states that anything functioning, any system is going to decay or devolve or lose energy. So even in a vacuum, based on all the other factors in space, a planet spinning per se should theoretically lose energy, even if it's in a complete vacuum. Like entropy should take over, and there should be energetic loss somewhere. I mean, and if you look at planets, they're balls of gases with constant turbulence and all kinds of potential energetic loss, right? But they're there, they're spinning, and things are evolving or moving and shifting and stuff, but there's not this clear indicator that things are just slowing down and losing speed. Now, again, we have a limited scope of time of observation for these things, but from what science tells us, like, entropy doesn't really apply to the universe the way we'd like to think, which is why people grapple with Big Bang and trying to explain cosmology and stuff. And this is where a lot of the problems arise in a lot of these systems of knowledge is people run with an idea and it gets them somewhere, and then they want to hold on to that idea tightly and never let it go. And sometimes we find new evidence that says, well, that led you to some good understanding, but it really isn't really the whole picture, and we have to modify our thinking a little bit. And science can be very slow to do so sometimes.
Yes.
So you want to talk about a potential alternative perspective on Big Bang Theory. You think about the fact that the universe is constantly here, and it's constantly doing stuff, and stuff is constantly evolving and being created, and the one thing we're looking at is consistency. So, a lot of quantum physics and a lot of ancient spiritual and science systems kind of point to the fact that everything is constantly being created. Like, it's not like the universe was created and it's all here, and then it's just like by happenstance evolving. It's like, what if it's continually being created and evolved intentionally by some force? So that's the crux of a lot of these systems that I tend to have learned from. And so when you take that away, like almost like the Big Bang's constantly happening.
Yes.
And part of the crux of how that all works is we're taught that the universe started from this one infinitesimal space that doesn't exist, that was hyper dense with material, and it's blown up and expanded to our universe. But again, a lot of alternative scientists and ancient systems point to the fact that really this tiny, infinitesimal, hyperdense base, we'll call it, but it's not space because it's really full,
right,
and it's hyper dense and hyper stable, is actually everywhere, in everything, and it unfolds an infinitesimal amount of itself to create our entire universe, and that is what's happening.
well,
and
yeah,
there's a line in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu text, is one most people would call it, but it's actually a Vedic text,
right,
really, extension. And Krishna says to Arjuna is this guy who's like a prince, and Krishna's like his chariot driver who's become his like spiritual guide on this battle journey. They're in a battlefield sitting here talking while slings and arrows are flying over their heads. When he sits down, he's like, hey, I know you're having trouble with this whole thing where you have to lead this army to slaughter people, but let's sit down and talk about it. Anyway, they get into a deep conversation. At some point, he says to Krishna, how do you create all this? How is everything created? And he says simply, I unfold back into myself over and over again.
wow,
So, if Krishna is acting as the voice of the universe, and you're dealing with hyper dense, hyper stable material that is hyper intelligent, that is in and around everything, and all it does is unfold an infinitesimal amount of itself to become what we consider reality, that tends to be right in line with what the most of your quantum physics is kind of driving at right now. And again, if you jump into some ancient spiritual and scientific systems and stop looking at it as kooky, crazy mythology and start trying to glean some wisdom from them, they kind of say the same fucking thing. So,
well, no, absolutely, and when
so
you
it's kind of everywhere. So whether you may or may not believe it, it has some credence to it that like should lend to some consideration and ponderance.
Well, it makes sense that the universe would be continually creating itself when you understand that time is not linear. In fact, time itself is just a construct and a constraint, which, all times exist simultaneously in a single moment. And I think that's my major problem with the Big Bang, is that it just assumes beginning, middle, end, and that's not exactly how it works.
Well, right, exactly. And again, some of the spiritual systems I've kind of loosely followed and learned from, and some of the philosophies come back to this idea, and this is where reincarnation stems from, and the idea of a soul, because again, a lot of modern religion and science tends to deal with the concept of a soul, acknowledging that one exists, but that's basically where the conversation ends. It's kind of fucking dumb.
Yeah.
So the idea that if something truly exists, it will always exist. It is permanent. And if something doesn't exist permanently, it's not really real. It's just a temporary, transient state.
Right.
So this kind of crux of Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, they all kind of fall in line with this kind of concept of like, what is really real? We think that like the things we use and touch every day are real, that our bodies are real, but the whole crux of these philosophies is like not necessarily that they don't exist, but they're not truly real because they don't always exist. They're not really, in the sense of the universe in the grand scheme of things, they're not really something. They're just the same as like a song you hear on the radio. Once it's gone, baby.
Yeah.
It never really existed. You just experienced it.
You led right into my next question.
I'm sorry?
You led right into my next question, which was, is any of this real? Is this universe even real? Or is it just the Maya, the illusion?
As real as you want it to be.
Yeah, I usually have to pay for that.
Yeah, but back to what I was saying, and to segue back into answering that, the idea is that our spirit is real because, all right, like, basis off some real science that people will accept, what your body is made up of is constantly changing. Every 7 odd years, most of the cells and most of your organs and skin and stuff in your body have been replaced. So you're not literally, like, you are not in the same body you were as a child. It may look the same. You may feel different, but still identify as you, Marcus. You have evolved maybe in a mental and spiritual way, but you still identify like, I am Marcus. And you look down your body like, this is my body, but you also know that it's not really the same body you came into this world in, right? So your body is constantly shedding like the snake of a skin, so it's clearly not you, but you clearly know you are there.
Yeah.
You are the anchor of this body that it is centered around. Well, what is you? You know?
Yes, exactly.
And so that's where modern science and religion do acknowledge there's something that defines you that does not necessarily just reside in the physical mind, even though that's what we've originally been told. We're starting to get to the point where, like, there's some je ne sais quoi here. And that je ne sais quoi, the spirit is ever present, you know,
And eternal.
When you acknowledge that it is ever present, that it is connected to all that is, which is ever present, which is the underpinnings of our entire universe. But the what's on top of the stage is just the show, you know. What really matters is the stage itself, and that's always the grappling question of science and spirituality: is what is the stage? You know, what is the universe made of, or who made the universe? And I mean, there's that immortal question that I think is one of the biggest rabbit hole questions. Well, if God created the universe, then who created God?
Well, see, now you make me think of a book that I keep coming back to in my mind. It's called The Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard. And I mean, the whole premise of the book is he gets visited by these two beings from the future, a male and a female. And I'm going to spoil it. In the course of the book, he learns that the two people are really him and his wife in a future life. Like they represent the evolved, you know, the final evolution of the consciousness of each of them, and they come back to visit their past life to help them reach that state, like a circle. But the premise of it is, and it's all about Jesus, talks a lot about Jesus, because apparently the Gary's visitor, Ashton, I think the two is Ashton and Persa. Ashton apparently was one of Jesus' disciples in a previous life. And he basically says that the whole teaching of Jesus is that this entire universe is not we created it. See, the mistake is assuming that God created the universe. And the premise here is that, no, we created it in our separation from God. And so all of this is just an illusion. It's just an illusion created by our separateness. And Jesus was one of those people who figured that out and was able to completely transcend, like a bodhisattva, like to transcend the illusion and yet remain in it to help other people, you know, escape the illusion as well. But well,
that's part of the thing. I mean, it's like, what if we stepped into a big video game,
right,
and part of the video game is you have to forget about the reality outside the video game, and now you're in a virtual reality machine. I mean,
yeah, well, and then simulation theory, which is really hot right now.
Yeah, I don't buy simulation theory. That goes back to the whole crux of simulation theory is that and I'm not saying this isn't a simulation, but I'm saying I don't buy the explanation for simulation theory, which a lot of the explanations are based on the fact that our numbers we're coming up with don't jive with our original concepts and constructs of reality and the formulas we used to explain it. So instead of somebody saying, hey, maybe we've got something a little off here, they're saying, well, maybe reality's a little off. You see, that doesn't work for me. You following me?
Yeah, no, totally.
Okay, I didn't know if I was making any sense, but these simulation theories do have some credence, I think, when you think of it this way, when you think of exactly what you were just saying. I mean, it's this active separation from ourself, really. I mean, if we think of, like, we created the universe, then theoretically speaking, we're God, part and parcel, and which is what is said in most religious texts. And again, when you don't think of God as a big white bearded man, but is like whatever the universe is of itself, and we come from and of that, then that makes a lot of fucking sense. But brings you back to the tipping point of, like, well, if we've kind of forgotten who we are and created this illusion, I mean, theoretically speaking, even if it's not with human machines and stuff, we're just some transcendental being. We basically stepped into kind of a virtual reality machine that we've created, basically, on some level. On some level, no matter how you want to conceptualize it, instead of humanizing it, we've created a virtual reality machine.
For what purpose?
Whatever this virtual reality we're experiencing, part of the condition and constraints, as you put it, that we've created beside this linear temporalness to help understanding it, we've also created this complete sense of separation and ignorance, even though really we aren't, because we're in the womb of ourselves, you know?
Well, yeah, but of course, if you're going to play a video game, the best games are played when you don't know it's a game. That's the gift of forgetfulness, is you come down here. If we knew that, oh, I'm here to learn some lessons and have some fun and it's all going to be okay. I mean, we do know that, but also we come down here and we forget our connection to the source, and that's part of the fun. That's part of the joy of relearning that or rediscovering that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, I think that's part of the joy, and I think that's part of what's going on right now. I mean, that's kind of the whole idea is, you know, and it comes back to my fascination with shamanism. So I don't know if you know much about shamanism. It's a very open source folk tradition, and it involves a lot of things, but there's some basic tenets and basic activities and basic concepts that are usually in trinities that are really simple. Part of the shamanic rite of being a shaman, not just taking through shamanic practice, which isn't exclusive to a shaman, is the act of observation. And through observation, you acquire allies and tools, and through those allies and tools, you acquire song. So the highest tenet of shamanism is actually to acquire music. Wow. And song. Kind of fascinating there. But back to my point, which is one of the basic shamanic acts of shamanic rite that everyone would go through in a lot of primitive culture is this, and this is the way that up until modern society we've kind of kept things in check. So back to the idea of some of the paradoxes. So to keep a culture having some continuity of culture and presence of wise tradition, things stayed relatively the same in a lot of antique cultures, but to bring in new ideas, to do new things, what they would do is, at the coming of age, when somebody would finish their incarnation into this body, which happens sometimes in your late teens, early 20, they would go out and separate from their culture and society and everything they knew and go out into the wilderness and, you know, fast, meditate, hunt, you know, whatever the tradition was of their society, and they would separate from the society and acquire new information and knowledge and bring it back and reintegrate it into the society. We stopped doing this as a culture.
Yeah.
You know, kids go away to college all the time, and their parents think they're fucking loons for all the new information they've learned, and kind of forms this segregation and ostracization. This happens in all kinds of segments of our culture. Let's use that one example. But so back to the idea of what if this is some self-imposed game or reality or lesson? Well, if we apply that same sense of shamanism, we come from whatever the universe is made from. We'll call it God for the sake of this conversation, keep it simple. And we come from that, and we have separated from that, and now we're in the separation and acquiring new information. So at some point, there's going to be a reuptake or reintegration of the information, and I think that's kind of what's beginning right now. It's just happening on such a long time scale that in our human terms, we think nothing's happened or happening, but really we're in this transition, which is what everyone points to, this Armageddon that's happening, which if you look at the Greek explanation of Armageddon, it actually means like of a lifting of a veil.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's really a lot of these ancient systems point to, and everybody tries to point to these concise dates, but if you look at cosmologically, I mean, a matter of decades, even hundreds of years, is nothing, not even a blink of an eye. It's nothing. And so we're kind of on that turning point, I believe, and I think a lot of people are experiencing that, but that's kind of, I think, the lost wisdom of understanding where we are at and what our purpose is here, which is to experience and learn and to go back home. And whether it's through just dying or experiencing all of us going back home in en masse when there's like a reconnection on an energetic level to our grand consciousness, I don't know. Or maybe it's just a bunch of hippy-dippy shit and we're just going to get wiped out by an asteroid in a couple of years, you know? Who knows, or an ice age.
I just, that was exactly what I was thinking was the comet, Graham Hancock, Magicians of the Gods, and the idea that, you know, we entered the orbit of a comet and the debris hit about 12,000 years ago, almost wiped out the entire human civilization. We had to reboot, and there was an ancient human civilization before that sort of passed on the knowledge they had to these primitive humans that arose after the comet impact. But there was one part of it, I think this was actually from Spirit Science, the human history movie, which is this sort of cobbled together summary from all the different stories about Earth's past. But the thing that I found interesting was Atlantis. And the Atlanteans knew that the piece of the comet was going to hit. And the Greys from Mars were here at the time. And again, take this however you want. I'm just conveying the idea. The Greys argued with the Atlanteans because the Greys were, they were all about manifesting an external Merkaba. They wanted to create a device that would blast that rock out of the sky. And the Atlanteans were saying, no, this is the will of God. This is meant to happen. We just need to let it happen. And I started thinking about that. What if something like that, an asteroidal impact that destroys almost everybody, is the event that shifts us en masse into a higher consciousness?
Why not? I mean, that's why, back to my fascination with ancient concepts, a very common idea that you see often is things are good or bad, right?
Right.
They're dichotomous, they're polarized, they're right or wrong. And if you look at, and that's part of, I think people struggle with, they humanize God, quote unquote. Well, God is the creative force of the entire universe, and it's created all the good and all the bad we've experienced. So, when you look at Shiva, which is often called the destroyer, but is also a creator,
Absolutely.
and if you look at the story of the Phoenix and all these other ancient stories, you see this attempt to convey the interconnectedness of creation and destruction. To make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. What's good for the lion is bad for the gazelle. For an ecosystem to survive, sometimes it has to be cataclysms and destructions. This is the whole point. I mean, it's like we humanize things and go, oh, that's horrible. And on a certain scale, yes, it is horrible, all the death and destruction. But at the same time, to what end? The universe destroys planets and solar systems. I mean, who knows how many civilizations and individuals have been destroyed and created over the eons of history. I mean, and again, as we humanize things, I mean, think about how many microbes you destroy every day with your sanitation practices, or at least your average person's sanitation practices. Oh, who's to say they aren't worthy, all because they happen on a different scale? I mean,
this is my beef with
bring a lot of philosophical questions into play. I'm
sure.
not really proposing any side of it, but when we break apart creation and destruction and think, I mean, to make a building, you have to quarry stone, you have to rip apart existing stone and turn it into smaller pieces and then build something new out of it. I mean, anything we build, we're destroying something else to do so.
Absolutely. Well, this is my big beef with
where does it end? I mean, to live, you have to kill. You have to kill something. I don't care if it's bacteria and algae or whatever, but you have to kill something to live.
See, that's my beef with vegans is, they don't want to eat meat because of the pain and suffering that goes into the animal when it's killed, but yet plants have a consciousness. I mean, that's fact. That's proven. And you're eating plants. You're ripping them out of the ground. You're doing the same thing as you would do to an animal.
But you can't hear it scream.
Yeah, but it's not... Exactly. That's the thing. Is you're still feeding off of other life, whether you're a vegan or not. I mean, that's...
Well, no, exactly. I mean, only certain beings don't feed off of other life, and even then, that's potentially debatable. I mean, there's a whole, again, interconnectedness of things, The predators need the prey need the predators, Again, I mean, you hear hunters talk about, you really, for the health of the species and the population, say, deer, you really need to cull it.
Yes.
Otherwise, they'll, starve, or I mean, they're going to die anyway. I mean, they're going to freeze or starve to death anyway, half of them. So you might as well kill some of them and give the few that are left a better chance.
Oh, same thing with the bacteria on your skin. I mean, if you just didn't shower and just let that bacteria grow, you wouldn't last very long.
I'm sorry. Sorry?
Well, like you said with the bacteria on your skin that you kill. I mean, you have to do that. If you just, I'm not going to kill this bacteria on my skin because it's alive and it's aware, well, you're not going to last very long. It's going to eventually eat up the host. You know, we have to clean ourselves. We have to kill those cells in order to grow new ones. My answer to the whole plant thing was that I you know, this is just a theory, but that what makes plants different than animals in killing them is that part of the deal of being a plant is they know that when they come down to manifest as a plant consciousness, that they will be used for food for other beings. Like, they agree to that before they come down.
Well, because, I mean, plants get eaten by everything. I mean, that's the whole biological. And it's funny because a lot of how plant biological development is taught is as defense mechanisms, but there's lots of baiting things into eating them. Plants, they're fruit-bearing plants particularly. They're not baiting you into eating the original plant, the parent plant, but they're baiting you into eating its fruit. You know, some fruits, like hot pepper, is meant to defend. You know, and they're just a seed pod with you know, food that turns to biodegrades into food for the next generation. You know, like, think of a pepper, it falls, it rots, the seeds germinate, and now you got a little bit of dirt.
Right.
But say like an apple or a grape or a cantaloupe, something that's evolved to develop a sweet fruit to tempt animals to eat it and then spread its seed.
Can I stop you for
smart, man.
Can I stop you for 1 second? Did you change your phone? Did you put yourself on speaker or something?
No, not at all.
It seems a little fuzzier than it was last time.
I've been on my headset the entire time.
Really, you haven't changed anything?
No, I mean, I've moved rooms, but
okay. It just seems a little less.
Maybe, I don't know.
All right, well, let's just keep on
Hold
going.
on, maybe it's got spun around. Hold on. Like, I think the thing was twisted. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's a little better.
The mic was facing the other way.
Yeah, that's
it's just like one of those little mics on a lanyard.
Yeah, that's better.
Those fancy headsets they give you with the phone, you know.
Yeah, I'm doing this. This is definitely low tech right here. I have my recorder right next to the speakerphone, but when I tested it out last time and played it back, you came in crystal clear, so I'm just assuming that it's going to happen this time.
Yeah, it's never going to be as good as if we're just in studio, though. We're going to have to do that soon.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Just get together.
Well, you're going to hopefully come down in a month or so that'll be the time.
So anyway, back to where we were at. Where were we at?
Plant consciousness and
Yes,
seeds reproducing. You pick the pepper and the seeds go in the ground and you get new ones.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is plants are smart. They like baited us into cultivating them and eating them, and other animals. Like a lot of fruit plants actually depend on birds to spread their seeds far and wide.
Right.
It's just like, so that doesn't know that you're eating it when you harvest it and kill it and eat it, but it's smart enough to know to bait birds into helping it spread.
Right, which lends credence to my theory is that they are aware of that. This is part of the deal of being a plant consciousness is you could get ripped out of the ground and used for food, and that's part of your purpose, and that's okay.
Interesting, but what about animals? I mean, there's prey animals. I mean, that's, I guess, the part of the deal, right? You're going to be potentially food at some point.
Well, even humans. I mean, if you're coming down here to learn lessons, then maybe one of the lessons you choose to learn is what it's like to be tortured. You know, what it's like to experience poverty. And that you make this decision from a higher awareness before you project yourself into this lower dimension. Again, with the gift of forgetfulness. Like, you know it's okay, you know it's all game and it's not real and you're going to learn some lessons, but when you get here and you're being tortured, you think that that's real.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is part of the deal, man.
Well, so okay, tell me what you've been up to lately, just in your personal life. I mean, you are obsessed with the gardening and growing things. You're doing that in your backyard. You're working with music. Where are you at right now? What's your situation?
Right now, I have about 35, 40, approximately 6x3 beds planted in my yard, growing various crops. I also have a bunch of perennials and flowers and various other beds planted. I also spend some time interacting with some significant people in the farming community here in my local scene, and also New Bedford. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's kind of a famous fishing port. But New Bedford, Massachusetts, I know a few people in that area, and it's kind of, not too far from me. It's like a half an hour, 45 minutes. But I'm interacting with a bunch of people in that metro area. There's a bunch of farming and nonprofits going on. So that's stuff that I've kind of loosely tapped into. Of course, this time of year, I kind of put my head down and do most of my work on my own yard. And, I work with a few people who volunteer here, and I help them by teaching them stuff and offering my services and resources. So that's kind of what I'm doing now with farming. I mean, my whole end game with that is, right now just to try to develop a piece of land that produces the quality and quantity of food to at least feed myself and a few other people a variety of food most of the year. Some of that is dependent on classic forms of processing food, most of which do not deal with killing the food. So those would be forms of fermentation, drying.
Sure.
Also salt packing, oil packing, sugar packing, honey packing things. So freezing and canning are kind of like last ditch efforts for me. I'd rather root cellar, dry, ferment things.
Well, and the fermented things have probiotics, right? So that's a major plus of letting those things ferment, is when you're eating them, you're getting really good live gut bacteria. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So various forms of food processing and preservation that exist outside of canning and freezing do all kinds of stuff to food besides make it taste yummy. So when you're fermenting food, it's a form of pre-digestion is a good way to look at it. Even though we're using it as a form of preservation, you're actually not only culturing microbes, which are debated whether they're beneficial. For a long time, people were always saying they're beneficial. There's been some quote-unquote studies recently that say that they're not really beneficial. I don't know. All I know is when I eat fermented food, I feel really good. So I don't know if it's the bacteria or if it's the bacteria breaking down the food and making other nutrients, because, again, I'll take a lesson I learned from agriculture in part of the problem with a lot of people getting healthy food is the plants are not growing in healthy soil, and part of that isn't just the nutrients content of the soil, it's the fact that the soil is devoid of microbes, bacteria, and funguses, which live subsoil, that actually live symbiotically on and around plant roots, and they break down nutrients into more bioavailable nutrients for the plants to uptake in a more regulated manner. And I suppose that something similar happens when we ferment food, there is actual scientific data to say what happens chemically to food, but what I think is kind of happening is the same thing in a sense of it's form pre-digestion, and you're simplifying sugars, taking starches and turning them into sugars. You're also taking things and synthesizing different nutrients that weren't there because they're byproducts of these bacterial things breaking down the food. So yeah, you're not only getting different nutrients and more bioavailable nutrients, but you're also, potentially getting probiotics, which is debatable. And you're also usually getting food that is acidic, which in a pleasant way. And I find that generally speaking, when one eats acidic food, it's good for you, and you're not going to get citrus in the middle of the winter in a cool weather climate. So having naturally fermented vinegars and naturally fermented foods handy is a good way to get that kind of food in your diet. So that's really what's good about that. And this similar thing happens when you dry food. If you do it right, you preserve a lot of the vital nutrients and enzymes, but at the same time, some enzymes and oxidation occur to enhance flavor and also break down the food a little bit so that when you eat it, you're actually getting more out of it, which is kind of cool.
I know garlic is one of those where if you slice garlic and just let it sit out for a few minutes, it releases, begins with an A, I can't remember the name of the chemical, but which makes the garlic even more powerful than it already is in terms of its antibacterial properties and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool, the whole cell wall of alliums and how they work, because that's part of why, like, also an onion messes with your eyes. It's all the similar things where the way the cell walls are designed in alliums, there's like an inner and outer cell wall, and when you rupture them and they interact, there's like chemical and enzymatic interactions.
Right.
So yeah, that kind of thing, and that's part of what my personal mission is to kind of re-educate people on food. It's not just you go buy some shit at the store and you fucking throw it in a pan and eat it. It's paying attention to seasonal, locally produced, quality, integrity food if possible, prepared properly, which means, in the summer you're probably eating more fresh foods, in the winter you're eating more fermented and cooked foods. You don't eat the same year round, and your body will love you for it.
I know the answer to this, but I want to hear you say it. What do you say to people who complain that eating that way is more expensive or more work than going out and buying the processed foods, which are cheaper?
Well, my answer is at least twofold. The number one, yeah, you're right. Food shouldn't be cheap and it shouldn't be easy, and it should be an important part of your life. If you think about it, try not eating for a few days and see what happens. I mean, I'm a big proponent of periodic fasting when you're healthy and know what you're doing. It's good for you, but in general, like, try living without food for a while and tell me it's not important and it's not worth investing your time, because whether you realize it, everything you're doing, I mean, shelter is negotiable, and clothing is within shelter, and housing is negotiable depending on where you live.
Mm-hmm.
But food and water and air are not negotiable.
Right.
And eating healthy food to make you feel good and to be able to do all the things you want to do, I don't care what else you do. If you're not eating right and getting a base level of physical activity, you're an idiot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I hate to be so blunt and crude sounding, but you're an idiot. And if you're not in reasonable physical fitness shape, and I'm not talking about you're super skinny or muscle bound or anything, you can move in a wide range of movements, and you can stay active for long periods of time at a low cardiovascular level. Like, if you can't do that, you need to do some walking and some other stuff, and you need to pay attention to your diet, because the second part of that answer is it's not really that expensive.
Right.
And we waste money on all kinds of other shit. Like, do you need another TV? Do you need to go out to dinner to a restaurant? Do you need to go to movies? Do you need to buy new tech devices every other, how big does your house have to be? How nice does this have to be? Do you smoke cigarettes? Do you drink alcohol? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but if you can afford to do those, you can certainly afford to buy healthier food with integrity and take a little more time to source and process it. And again, there's a lot of hidden rewards that people don't realize. A lot of what we're looking for in a lot of forms of entertainment is a biofeedback loop that satiates us. And we've learned to identify with those biofeedback loops that are pleasurable, but they're not what we're programmed for. We're programmed to respond to food. All living beings spend most of their time in the wild searching for food. Okay? So that's why animals in captivity have such a hard time, because they're not working for their food. And whether we realize it, that's why life is a little unrewarding, is we're not working for our food. So anytime you engage your food by growing a little, cooking a little, spend a little more time shopping and thinking about your food, preparing it, it's going to reward you if it doesn't do it right away, I guarantee within a few weeks you do these things, you'll be like, whoa, this feels good. It feels good to cook a meal and eat it. And I don't have any hard scientific data to prove it, but I think it's a very universal human condition.
I mean,
so
it makes sense from a scientific perspective. You literally are what you eat. You put crap in your body, that's what your body's going to use to make its, it's going to use those crappy raw materials. If you put good raw materials in, then it's going to have something good to work with.
Yeah, but what I'm also pointing to is the actual process of being engaged with your food.
Yeah.
Being part of that process, more than just going to a restaurant and ordering off a menu or a package of crap and putting it in a pan or a toaster oven or something. So yeah, not only are you dealing with healthy, but the other thing is also that, the laziness factor. It's like, if you spend just a little more time and buy a little more whole products and cook smartly, you can actually, even if you're not vegetarian or vegan, if you limit your animal product intake, you can buy really high quality animal products. And if you just limit the intake of that and focus on eating the cheaper things, which are actually the things that are really good for you, which is leafy greens and other fermentable vegetables, and then this is a debatable thing, but I think like dried beans and grains, if they're eaten smartly, are also a healthy, cheap way to go. And you start eating those things and appreciating simpler foods and starting to prepare them with some sense of cooking knowledge. I mean, and there's plenty of available resources for that these days. And I'm not talking about this crap like Pinterest crap. I'm talking about there's a lot of information out there if you want to learn how to cook simple food that tastes good. And I just don't see it being all that expensive or time consuming.
I was just gonna say, it's not hard. It's not time consuming.
It's gonna take a little time. It's gonna take a little work, but you can spend. I figured it out between, depending on where you live in the country, how well you want to eat. I think 2 adults can do between $100 and $150 a week eating pretty freaking well, and that's not just eating completely frugal. That's some frivolous food in there. If you don't go out to eat, and I think right now that's pretty crazy. I mean, you're talking $50 a person a week, and that's like eating a lot of nutrient dense food that people would say is expensive too. So like dried fruits, nuts, hemp oil, things like that, spirulina powder, coconut oil, things like that. That's where I spend my money.
Sure.
And so but the other thing is that you have to realize that the American notion that food should be cheap is a little skewed because we have a subsidized food system, and the food they're eating is literally garbage that is processed. I mean, even the meat that most people eat is subsidized by the corn industry, which is subsidized. They're selling corn cheaper than it actually realistically costs to produce it, and all the cattle is being fed it because it's so fucking cheap.
And the fish.
And so there you go. So now you're eating meat that's full of genetically modified material, pesticides, bacteria, and is nutrient deficient. And you can get meat for under $10 a pound, but it's garbage. You're gonna get sick. You're gonna get something.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's really, the question is do you want to be sick or do you want to feel good? And are you willing to put a little effort into feeling good? And if you're not willing to put a little effort into feeling good, then shut the fuck up and stop complaining that you feel so bad.
Yeah.
Because I really don't have any sympathy for anybody that says that they don't feel good. Most of the people I know that complain about not feeling good most of the time have tons of red flags with their lifestyle choices, and it's just you don't have to be a super health nut. I drink alcohol. I eat junk food. I eat non-organic food, but most of my diet is relatively clean, and I moderate what I consume that isn't, and I stay active, and I know I could feel better, but I feel pretty damn good for knocking on 40 years old at this point. And I look like I'm in my mid-20s. Most people don't believe me when I tell them how old I am.
Sure.
I have to show identification. Literally, I've had to do that twice in the past month with friends I've known for years. They're like, "Wait, I don't know how old you are." Wait, you're what? So it's like people are always asking me, like, literally what I do, and I'm like, are you really kidding? You know me, and you're asking me what I do. It's like, some people try to portray this pinnacle of health, but I'm not a health nut. I mean, I'm mediocre about it at best most of the time, but I do go through spurts of knuckling down and getting pretty into it, you know, and I go through periods of like, you know, like I said, doing that, and I go through some periods of like doing crappy things, and I feel it, and I know, and I'm honest with myself, and
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, well, I got to do a little better, you know, like maybe eat a little more healthy food, try to avoid some of these bad things that I've been doing. Like I said, one of the ones that sneaks up on me is alcohol, because I don't drink a lot of it per se, but I drink it frequently. Like I'm prone to having social beer and wine very often.
Right.
So, you know, that sneaks up on me personally. I mean, some people say, oh, you drink a glass of wine or two a day, and who the fuck cares? But for me, I do that for a couple of weeks in a row, you know, even every other day. It's like I feel kind of crummy.
Yeah.
You know?
It's true.
So, anyway. There's an expose on me and my thoughts about food and nutrition.
Well, those of us who know you know how you feel about it, and we've learned a lot from you. So, but that's the key, is that it is not difficult. It's really not even that time consuming to eat well. It's really not.
No. I mean, it's an adjustment at first. It seems like a lot of work at first because we live in a hyper-convenient society, but as soon as you get over the fact that it's not going to be dirt cheap and it's going to require a little bit of effort, if you can just deal with that and just take some time for 2 to 3 weeks to make some small changes that are gonna you know, whether it's to eat like a salad every day or to start making a meal for yourself every week or every other day or whatever it is. You just pick one thing. Don't revamp your whole diet overnight. I didn't do that. I mean, I've always been eating relatively well because I was raised with good eating habits, but I've never been super conscious of how I ate until I was in my mid-20s and late 20s, and that's when I started to do that, and it was a metamorphosis of years.
Were you always a vegan?
Pay attention.
Were you always a vegan, or did that came about in your 20s?
No, so I'm not vegan, first of all, and I'm actually not even really proper vegetarian because I do eat animal products on occasion.
Okay.
So we'll back it up. We'll just explain my kind of life history with food. I, grew up with a mother and a grandfather that had gardens. I grew up on Cape Cod, eating lots of fresh seafood. We had family members that hunted. So I grew up with a mother that, at least in my younger years, didn't really give us any processed food for the most part, like limited my intake of processed sugar, made a lot of meals from scratch, always, like I said, had in the summer fresh food around. So I developed some good eating habits at that point, but I wouldn't say they were the best eating habits. I mean, we still ate pretty typical American diet. And, you know, in my late teens, early 20s, as I kind of started to cut my teeth, I still ate reasonably well, but started to eat a lot of takeout food and things of that nature. And didn't know this at the time, but in retrospect, I've kind of learned a lot about, in my late teens, I started to have stomach issues. And I had a friend that was a vegetarian and recommended I try cutting out meat or red meat for a little while. And I know there was a lot of processed food I was eating at the time, but I also ate a lot of good food. And I was eating a fair amount of meat by the American standard, but nothing excessive. And I started to cut it out. And I started to feel better and started to learn a bit about vegetarianism and some other alternative nutritional things, which I had already learned a bit about basic nutrition from, I raced BMX for a few years and kind of got a little crazy about, you know, reading magazine articles by nutritionists and athletes that were experimenting with their diet and nutrition and self-educating on the subject. So I had a sense of it, but as I got into vegetarianism, I started to learn about alternative perspectives on diet and eating, kind of like they had a lot more nuances to them, to really sum it up. And in retrospect, I now know that that's also when we started really heavily switching to GM crops and heavy corn feeding of beef in the mid-90s to late 90s is when that all took place. So I think I was actually responding to all the glyphosate or genetic modified material or bacterial, whatever the hell was a byproduct of factory farming. But at that point, I slowly turned into a vegetarian over the course of a few years. But I was still a professional cook, so I would still, on occasion, like I worked at places that had wild game nights and would work with exotic meats, and I would obviously try that stuff. And I've never stopped eating wild-caught fish or wild-caught venison from people I know that hunt. I eat that a couple of times a year.
Sure.
I eat eggs. I eat good dairy. But I've, still, like I said, don't eat meat of any sort on a regular basis. I have chicken, so I eat eggs pretty regularly. But that's about it. And like I said, in my late 20s, I was just kind of experimenting with my culinary skills because I was a ex-professional cook and was thinking about doing something besides working in a restaurant with my culinary skills. And that's when I kind of started to get into growing my own food and started to get even more into nutrition and other forms of food processing, and realizing that growing your own food is the only way to ensure that it is as nutritious and delicious, because that was the one thing that I had always known that experience taught me was, like, aside from excessive amounts of like salt, sugar, and fat, which your palate is programmed to seek out. So when you dump a lot of that on anything, you're gonna think it tastes good. But
Right.
when you are accustomed to eating healthy things like fresh fruits and vegetables and stuff, your palate loves them, especially when they're grown right, because they're nutrient dense. They're full of flavonoids and glutamates and all kinds of phytochemicals and terpenoids and all kinds of good stuff that's in plants that are like you taste. And so when you taste all of these things in your plants, your palate's like, yay, I want this, and you like it. And your palate is designed to seek out nutrition, and people forget that. And these processed food companies have hijacked people's palates by hitting these hot buttons for fat, sugar, and things like that,
Right.
to really dump, like these crappy products. I mean, people eat crap that is basically all sugar and has no flavor that I can distinguish and say it tastes good. And I'm like, I don't understand this, But your palate is reprogrammable. That's part of its beauty, is that's we're omnivorous, and we've eaten lots of new and different food sources throughout history. And so that's really important to understand, that like your palate is programmable, reprogrammable, and you can condition it to like a lot of salt or a little bit of salt. And that, healthy food should taste good.
Yeah.
And when you're growing food, if it tastes really good, it's full of nutrition, and you're going to feel really good later, because, that's the other problem, is people don't seem to have this simple loop of logic of how I feel later as a byproduct of what I eat now.
Right.
So the problem is people only think of how it tastes and how that makes them feel, because, again, survival mechanism, biofeedback loop, flavors imprint. We are supposed to imprint with good food sources. If you were wandering in the wild and found a cascade of berries and ate them, and you're like, oh my God, this is so good, you're going to remember where that is. You're going to have this intense emotional connection to that experience, so that you remember it and you return to it, next season.
Sure.
So this is like biological programming, that is within us. We have biochemical feedback. The problem is we don't interact with it that way. You're raised with food being fed to you that's been crafted to taste good, even healthy food, and you get imprinted with things you like, and you want to keep returning to those things. And so people are, if they have bad eating habits, have a hard time learning good eating habits, because they're so connected to those bad eating habits emotionally.
Yeah.
And it's part of our hardwiring as a survival mechanism, you see?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Am I making sense? Am I getting too loopy here?
No, absolutely. It makes perfect sense.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, I don't know, because I'm kind of like abstracting here at this point, because I just like to kind of go down this road to kind of make people aware of what's going on here, because it's a really hard road to hoe. It's way easier, and, it is easy to make these changes, but it is that hard for people, especially when you, say, were raised eating soda and candy bars and processed fat.
Yeah, like myself.
Even if you were eating some healthy food, if you're eating those things from a young age, you've been conditioned to like those things. And you're going to have a strong emotional connection, whether you like it or not, that is hardwired to that lifestyle, you see. So, and it's also easy to go down that road at any point in life. And when you do, we find comfort and connectivity to that. And it's really difficult to get out of that space and into a healthier space.
Yeah.
So back to my personal thing is, fortunately, I had some good eating habits, and I spend a lot of time thinking about food as a chef. So for me, it can become very intellectualized and makes it very easy to, and I've always been experimenting as a chef with what I eat and what I cook. So for me, it's easy to play around with new habits because I look at it as an experiment for me, and cooking is really, really easy for me. And I recommend anybody who has a hard time cooking, just find some basic recipes, go watch some Good Eats, the Food Network show with Alan Brown. He talks about cooking techniques, and I wouldn't use his recipes, but he has a lot of really good technique. There's also a lot of probably YouTube channels of people talking about basic technique, but yeah, practice your knife skills and your basic cookery, and it becomes something that is very easy for even people that are not professional chefs. I have friends that are complete amateur self-taught cooks, and they have no problem whipping stuff together easily, just because they've done it. So if you can't do it, just go practice. I mean, the worst thing you're going to do is throw out a few pans of food. Just make sure you're using cheap stuff when you're practicing.
Right.
But so I was experimenting with what I ate and started to evolve what I ate and started to experiment with gardening. And again, being a cook, like what I was growing tended to be inspiration to play with recipes or new cuisines or just really play with it. And so I was on one vein, just like in a very organic way, responding to what I was growing, what little bit I was growing with putting that in my diet. But at the same time, I was on another page, like playing around with doing like superfood smoothies and fermenting kombucha and juicing and, just coming up with like really synergistic, healthy things to have in my diet and practices. And, I felt really good, and I had that going for a good year or two, like hardcore.
Right.
And it felt really good. And ever since then, I've been trying to get back to that place. It's not that I don't, like it was we discussed, live very healthfully, but I don't, I don't live how I was in that space for a couple of years where I was like really on it and everything was kicking. And it felt great and it was amazing. And again, I speak to the difficulty of like, it's hard to maintain all that in today's modern crazy world, especially when other people aren't in on it. There's no other outlets. Like you can't go out to eat very many places and get food that is in line with that philosophy. You can't get your friends to go to those places half the time. Even if they do exist. So and it's hard to spend the time and energy. Again, like I said, it doesn't take a lot of time and energy to eat relatively healthy. But like what I was doing, the level I was doing, it was a level of focus and like lifestyle consumption where it was hard to interact with other people in general unless you're gonna like come and get involved with what I'm doing, because I was literally like gardening and cooking and making processed food at home and spending a lot of time like meditating and doing spiritual practice and so a lot of that stuff is very time consumptive. But then again, I'm on the same kick right now. You ask me what I'm doing right now is, besides the gardening, I'm spending 2 to 4 hours a day playing music and studying music theory. And
this is what I love about you, Anthony, is you throughout this whole conversation you have anticipated what my next thing was going to be, because I was going to say, because I do have to go at a certain point, let's switch gears and talk about the music, because that seems to be one of your primary focuses right now from what you told me in our last few conversations. 2 to 4 hours a day, that's a serious commitment to your music. So what's going on there?
Well, so I've always been around music, and I love listening to it, and I've played guitar off and on for, I think, about 15 years. And I've just always been frustrated with, what little music education I had when I was young had been lost in between my teen years and when I picked up playing the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just frustrating, and I had learned how to read music a few years back, but hadn't really done much with it. And recently, I hooked up with a really good teacher and was really serious about playing because I've been playing for the past year or two very seriously, but was kind of frustrated. Like, I was putting all this time in, like I was putting like maybe an hour or so a day, which is still a fair amount of time,
Sure.
into it, and it just was like not beating my head against the wall. And I finally got over the emotional hurdle of being like, you know what, I want to learn music theory. Like, I'm going to stop like thinking it's beyond my level, and I just decided I was going to learn music theory. And for all those who listen who think music theory is some complex thing, at some level it can very much be, but on the most basic levels needed to understand and play music, it used to be taught as basic curriculum up to middle school. Like, by the time you hit middle school in American schools, up until like probably like the 70s, you knew how to play music and you understood basic, major, minor scale stuff and how to read music. Like, this wasn't like something that just the few music elite like Jimi Hendrix could do.
Right,
this is
right.
a large percentage of our population, not to mention a large percentage of the population might not have known like how to read music, but understood how to play and what they were playing. And there's a really deep tradition of folk music in America, and there's a very deep connection in the human condition. Again, back to my fascination with universal concepts. To music, people like to dance, people like to listen to music. It's been a part of human culture since human culture existed.
Well, and also learning music is, in terms of cognitively what it does for the brain and how that transfers over into all other areas of learning, math, science, reading. I mean, music activates all the different centers of the brain.
Correct. It actually, I've learned about that, and I've done a little bit with music, but this recent stint of working with it, I've really experienced that firsthand unfold, where I just like have gotten a little bit sharper and like easier to recall information, and part of that is it's like learning a new language. But the thing with music that makes it really kind of wacky is you're not only learning a new language, you're learning a bunch of new languages, because there's a bunch of language around understanding the language of music. So there's a bunch of English around to use to explain the language of music.
Sure.
Because the language of music has a simple alphabet. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, with 5 sharp flat notes added.
Right.
And so there's 12 characters. And then in most Western music, there's seven patterns, 7 words or phrases based on one dialect. But to understand that, you need to learn a whole bunch of other language, and there's actually multiple ways of conceptualizing the same thing in music, which are used interchangeably. There were different ways of conceptualizing music over history, but a lot of the way I'm being taught by my teachers right now is they actually talk at them from all of those angles to really wrap your head around what you're talking about and look at it as like a really concise, simple thing. So understanding that thing, I think is really interesting, because so you're learning a language, but you're learning a bunch of other languages to learn this thing, and those other languages are used to conceptualize this one thing in different ways.
Exactly.
So that whole act right there alone has so many layers of like really twisting the way you think. And then on top of that, usually you're also learning an instrument, which means you're learning to follow time, which I think following concise time, like tempo, like a metronome, I think there's something weird that happens when you do that. There's also something weird that happens when you try to listen to yourself and be humble and honest with yourself and listen to what you're doing without tearing yourself down, but also being honest when you're not good.
Sure.
And so it teaches you humility, it teaches you confidence, it teaches you patience, dedication. Like that's why it does that, because you have to go through all these personal, spiritual, emotional things to accomplish something with it. To play an instrument is easy. To do anything gratifying with an instrument is very difficult. I've played for years. I've been able to play songs and do very remedial stuff on a musical instrument. Not only until recently, until I started to really understand what I'm doing and put enough time in it that I'm proficient to be able, with a bunch of different techniques on my instrument, and I understand my instrument, have I actually felt a deep level of gratification. I've felt gratification from playing music. It always feels good. But this like super deep level where I'm not afraid of the instrument, where I actually have to like force myself to put it down, not pick it up, has only been very recent. You know, it's like up until 2 months ago, I used to have to force myself to pick it up, even if I wanted to. It was like this, but that's the dedication and the humility, because you emotionally you're like, I suck, basically. That's what you tell yourself. Most people tell themselves, I suck. And that emotional burden of feeling like you're not worthy or good enough is what inhibits you. And getting over that and being like, no, I'm good enough, and the only thing stopping me is how much time I put in.
Exactly.
Getting to that place is like a spiritual journey that is much more momentous than I just made it sound.
and going a step further with that, once you all those things that you're talking about when you individually play an instrument and learn music, then you take it to the next level where you start to play with other people, and that has all kinds of metaphors for social interaction, playing in time but together, feeding off of each other.
That, actually, I believe, and this is something I've been saying lately, if you look at the height of evolution of human culture and how much energy was put into cathedrals and churches and acoustic spaces used to worship God in history, like you start to realize that people already knew and still had known that music played in groups is the highest level of human intelligence and organization. There is something special that happens when people are playing music together and have to harmonize and adjust the volume. You're listening to yourself, you're listening to them, you're modifying what you're doing. You have to rely on tons of muscle memory, but yet you have to interact with that muscle memory to alter what you're doing to really synchronize. And yet it all happens almost intuitively, like when an athlete catches a ball.
Right.
And it's like I was discussing that the other day with someone, the complex algorithmic tree that is needed to explain like the trajectory of a ball and your movement when you go to catch it. Like if somebody throws you a ball and you're a moving target, like a baseball player trying to catch a fly ball or something, the math needed to explain that is so complex.
Yeah.
It's mind-bending.
Right.
Yet you take anybody with any basic physical prowess and throw them a fly ball or hit a fly ball to them, and they're, you don't have to be Major League Baseball player to like catch a ball in the air in motion.
Right.
I mean, but yet, most people don't realize what kind of complex, basic, formulaic, problem solving your brain is doing to calculate where to put you and your hand to get that ball.
Sure. Absolutely.
And the same thing is going on, I think, when you're playing music, when the thing needed to adjust what you're doing when you're playing an instrument or singing when you're working with other musicians is just like if you actually begin to break down the level of listening to you, listening to them, adjusting again your speed, your volume.
Well, going back to that idea of separateness, when you're playing music with other people, it starts to dissolve that feeling of separateness. I mean, that's the signal of, oh my God, we really are one organism here producing something together.
Well, that's, the root of the word organism, organization, and that's exactly what is happening is it's a form of organization. I mean, think about just a good example I like to use is if you think of a symphony, or an orchestra, like they're following a conductor, but they're also following a piece of music and each other. And exactly how many people are playing in a symphony orchestra? It's like...
So the symphony orchestra is the human body and all the cells that make it up, and the conductor is the consciousness.
I thought the conductor was just a human metronome.
I was just trying to use it as a metaphor of we are the conductors of our symphony organism.
you're absolutely right. I was just busting your chops.
That's okay. I'm used to.
I mean, even a conductor. I mean, a good example, just like your body, everything kind of knows what it has to do. Like I talk to people about this with leadership. I mean, it's a great example. Like some people I've discussed, like the sense of leadership in professional workspaces, talking about, well, you shouldn't have to really do much as a leader in professional workspace because you have everybody's a professional and that's what they're supposed to be doing. But the reality of the matter is for people to unify, they have to kind of divulge some sense of individuality, and somebody has to take lead because, you know, even anarchy needs some focus, right? So what happens is, like in symphony music, you have a conductor. Well, all those people have practiced all those pieces of music together dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Why can't they just play it? Well, you know, everybody's in a different space all the time. So even if you're really practiced, like that's what the place of a conductor is, exactly that, to kind of synchronize everybody. And also maybe he might do a little mood shift because like they don't just keep tempo. They actually do sometimes bring sections of instruments in and out at different pieces of the music, tell them to play lower and softer. So they are literally like almost like a soundboard engineer, but it's a direct human interface.
Yes. It's beautiful.
It's kind of wacky.
It's beautiful. It's almost a lost art these days. I mean, do you think that music these days, I mean, I don't know. It could just be that I'm an old man, and just like every generation,
saying that, don't you?
the kids today, you know, they listen to crap. But I really get this real sense of, like, I tell my students this all the time. I play them old music, and I want you to listen to this. I want you to see these are real people playing real instruments, singing with their voice, not a computer. There's something, it seems to me, that's being lost with today's music. Would you agree, or am I totally off kilter here?
Long answer to your short question. I do not fully agree. I do slightly agree. I believe that pop music is worse than ever.
Yes, that's what I'm specifically referring to as pop music.
The music industry itself is dying.
Yes.
And there's a lot of grassroots musicians coming up right now. And what crescendoed in the late 60s, early 70s was literally that. It was, again, we're going to say the crashing of a wave of all of this folk tradition in America and basic music education, which is the one missing element right now. So everybody had music education, so you had educated audiences, and you had all these people with basic music education that would just learn how to play instruments, and some of them were demonstrably good. And, you know, people were experimenting with what music was. And, you know, that at that time, popularized, marketed music kind of drove it. The record industry kind of started to push some of that. I mean, but unfortunately, they tried to contain things in a box, and as we've moved forward through time, you know, you can see how they've limited artists and destroyed movements. Like a good example would be a self-absorbed movement would be like the rap movement. You know, there's these amazing street performers, all different flavors and styles of rap in the late 70s, early 80s. And by the time you get to the mid-90s, it all starts to get really homogenous. And it starts to follow a marketing formula, and it's really sad. And only recently, in the past few years, have you started to see more inventive underground rappers.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The rap I hear today is it's pablum. I mean, there's no depth to it whatsoever. Where are the poets, the ones that were doing rhymes that are deep and have these complex internal rhyme structures with meaning and complicated words? I don't hear that as often these days.
No, you don't hear it as often. I mean, that's why, you know, I hate to say it, but someone like an Eminem is like one of the rarest things there is. There's a couple other underground artists that I can't think of their names off the top of my head because I'm not super familiar with them, but I've heard their stuff, and it's pretty outrageous. And they're the ones that, like, the geeks in the underground rap community love. They're just really interesting people.
I can think of Immortal Technique as one of them.
Those are the few and the far between. I mean, most of it's about, you know, marketing and making money.
But it's always been that, right? I mean, even in the 20s and the 30s, you had your people who were really talented doing something original, and then you had the others that were just, just going along with what was the popular music and just kind of mediocre in that way, just following the formula. It's always been that.
I mean, I don't know, what time period did you just say?
I mean, I was just going back to like 20s and 30s, but I would say even the time period you talked about, the 60s.
I don't know, because, I mean, there's always been a vein of marketing in music. I mean, Nashville is where it really started.
Okay.
But there's always been musicians that want to make music. I mean, they want to make money, obviously. I mean, musicians love playing music, but it would be nice to have some money, right? And musicians usually don't make a lot of money, and it's a lot of work. I mean, all the practicing, all the setup, all the transportation of things, like playing a gig is only one part of what you're doing, and you're not getting paid too great to do it unless you're a big name. And so becoming a big name is a big deal. And what part of made the evolution of pop music in this country is really fascinating, because is when they started cutting records and stuff. Records was originally just a way, basically an extended form of marketing.
Sure.
I mean, that's what it originally was an extended form of marketing. It was a way to let people know, like, hey, this is what this person sounds like, or a way to just share what you're doing. But like, music was still all about live performance. I mean, you have to remember that. Like, it's times you're talking about, music was literally live performance. Like, you wanted to hear music, you went to see somebody. It was very rare to have records.
Right.
In the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, that started to happen more and more, and that's when like Nashville came in line, and like guys in England and in America started to try to figure out like what's going to sell records. But it wasn't like this huge focus. People were just cutting records and trying to figure out what would kind of sell records. It wasn't like a huge money industry, so it was more of a survival thing for the record companies at that point. You know what I'm saying? It was like, I mean, it was their industry, but it was more like staying afloat than making muko buko. And so when you get into the 50s and 60s, that's when money started to really come into play. But the crazy thing that happened is you had a bunch of next to poor people and well-off people that didn't have much money and didn't care, because the economic social situation of the late 50s, early 60s in this country. So you had a lot of like hobos and artists and stuff that were like living off of nothing, and then you had a bunch of middle class people that were well educated going to college, and a bunch of psychedelics hit the ground, and next thing you know, you have the 60s, music and psychedelic revolution all intertwined. And somewhere in there, you had the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and other bands like the such, where I think, when the Beatles happened, I think that was the real big deal, because not just because the Beatles are awesome as musicians, but what happened there is all of a sudden the idea of making money purely off of records and focusing on studio albums all of a sudden became a thing.
Which leads me to today. How do you feel, because I have very strong opinions about this, the argument from artists that pirating music or not purchasing the music is a detriment to the artist who's creating it because they're not getting paid. What's your feeling on that?
That's one way of looking at it. I mean,
see, I don't know.
I understand wanting to make money and support yourself very well off of what you're doing, and I think the feeling of a missed opportunity to make money is frustrating.
Yeah, I mean,
but there's also the fact that I'm pretty sure the highest grossing album in history was the Rainbows album by Radiohead.
Really?
And yeah, highest grossing, not number selling,
okay,
highest grossing money-wise album. Do you know how they sold it? They gave it away on their website.
Exactly. That's my point.
It for whatever you wanted, which means you could get it for nothing.
That's my point.
Or if you wanted to donate $100 to the band, you could buy it for $100. So guess what? A whole bunch of cult followers loved that band and gave them that money. There's also a bunch of grassroots artists in the United States that, again, is a form of marketing to popularize themselves, to get people to come to their shows, give away their albums or songs on YouTube and their website.
Right.
And so the idea I personally subscribe to is, if you're a really good artist and you're, because again, back to people were making money off of cut albums, and people were trying to make these very non-organic, very rigid, like studio albums. And if you want to understand that point of view better, go watch this movie called This Might Get Loud. Jack White talks about his feeling on music in the 80s, and he really typifies the point better than I could at this moment. But the idea that music is about an organic human experience, and we've been listening to a bunch of essays and monologues instead of conversations for the past few decades. And I think the folk music tradition, not like literally the style folk, but the tradition of folk music, of people playing and interacting with each other, I think needs to come back. And I think there's a lot of artists that are bringing it back, that are playing small venues, that are no-name artists, that have these weird styles of music, that are resurrecting classic styles from various parts of the world. And they're doing really fun and cool stuff, and they're out there. And a lot of them, like I said, are selling albums, but they're also giving stuff away. And I think it's a good time to be alive, because I think we're at a time when, again, before the 60s, there was the 40s and 50s, there was a lot of like the beatniks and a lot of like Delta blues and Chicago blues, and all that stuff was happening in a pseudo underground thing, and then it all of a sudden turned into rock and roll. And I think that's what's kind of going on right now is, you got all this garbagey pop, but if you look around a bit, there's a lot of really cool artists doing cool things that are not popular and most people haven't even heard of. Yet you go listen to their music and you're like, this is something. Yeah. And I think in the next decade or so, I think we're gonna see that shift back over into the mainstream. I think, because I mean, God, how long can we listen to Justin Bieber?
Oh my God, seriously, or Drake or whoever. It's enough is enough.
Where I'll leave that conversation.
Because I do believe that it's reflective of the level of intelligence or awareness of the populace at the time. If this is what these people are listening to, that's also kind of what's going through their heads.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying, is if you started basic music education with singing in elementary, and eventually by the end of elementary working in some instrumentation, and you made everybody learn basic music theory like the solfeggio, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. By the time you leave middle school, if you have a handle on it, or junior high or whatever, like, I guarantee that would be the death of people like Justin Bieber, because people would be like, this music is so simple and garbage.
Right.
Like, I can't deal. Right. Because that's why some music that people really like, that are musicians or music nerds, tend to really like, that a lot of people are like, oh, this is too much. I think that's where a lot of it comes from, because, I mean, I understand there's some music that's still very too much for me at times, but at the same time, your palate really broadens, just like with food, when you expose yourself to different things, and also when you have a basic education, all of a sudden music because that's what I'm trying to say, like, most of why people like that kind of music is because it's music with training wheels. It's so simple and crude and to the point that it hits all those points that make music sound good, which are things that great musicians touch upon in a more verbose format.
Yeah, it's the sugar, salt, and fat.
You listen to, like, say, Grateful Dead or Allman Brothers or the Beatles. I mean, that's where the Beatles were geniuses, though. Literally, they could take some very verbose, complex music and make it still sound very simple and approachable. Right. And I guess that's the rub, is trying to figure that sweet spot out, because that's a really hard place to be. A lot of really good musicians sometimes can't get there.
So the pop music of today is the sugar, fat, and salt.
Right, exactly. As opposed to having your, steel-cut oats and leafy greens,
Yeah. That'd be a great name for a band, the Leafy Greens.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that last part.
I said that would be a great name for a band, the Leafy Greens.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about calling my band Fresh Picked Beets.
There you go. That's perfect.
I just figure there's just so much complexity to that, and so much nailing who I am.
I'm a sucker for puns, so I unlike many other people still believe that puns are some of the highest form of comedy and humor.
Yeah. Well, the idea is it's also a double entendre, because it's fresh picked beets, like the vegetable is the implied, but it's actually literally going to be spelt and said fresh picked beets, like play it on the beat.
Yes, exactly. I love it. It's perfect.
So, I don't know. I just like a pun in slightly double entendre too. Or maybe I'm misusing that, but I feel like there's the double meaning, so to speak, is part of the pun.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Because it is quite conceptual. That's the best band name I've been able to come up with, but who knows? I haven't even got a band yet, so.
One step at a time, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you need the name first, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
No, not really.
Okay, I have like maybe 20 minutes left, so I wanna just kick this into high gear, and I hope that we have tons of conversation still left in us, so hopefully you'll come back on and we'll do this again. But let's talk a little bit about spirituality. I'm not even sure what I mean other than where are you at spiritually right now? Are you having new discoveries? Are you?
I'm always having new discoveries.
Right. I'm not even sure exactly how I want to phrase this, but I feel that I don't know. I mean, I view you as somebody who has done more of their homework than I have. Let me put it that way. And I've been thinking a lot about this lately, especially my last experience that I discussed with you, how I went into it sort of not having the proper preparation, either physically or mentally, and how that has sort of a trickle-down effect in your own life. Do you think that it's important for people to be spiritually aware? Do you think that people need to study up on these things in order to have a healthy spiritual life, or?
Well, I don't feel like there's any need, first of all, for anything. One of my favorite books, and also a good place that I like to borrow my personal philosophy from, because it's really not borrowing, it just really explains a lot of my personal philosophy, is a book called The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment.
Oh, well.
And in that book, he opens up with just saying that he doesn't believe that enlightenment of any sort requires really anything. So, in a word, no, I don't believe that. But that being said, I don't believe that it is completely unfruitful to take the time to explore and discover. I mean, if we lived outside of this particular culture and society, and I don't mean just the American, I mean the global culture and society we live in, I think it might be a little more natural to just figure things out and identify with them, but the way we're taught and conditioned to behave and think tends to mitigate any natural inclination towards a spiritually healthy modality.
Agreed.
And before I get too much further, I want to clarify for whoever may be listening to this what we're talking about with spirituality, because again, I think we tend to humanize this spirituality into this white-bearded man woo-woo shit.
Yeah.
And I'd like to clarify, because spirituality could quite simply be put as like modern psychology, a lot of the emotions and stuff we deal with, but it also can tend to go towards the woo-woo shit, but that is actually verified by science. Like, you do have an energetic field. Sorry to disappoint everybody. But I think that when we tend to identify with things, we tend to conceptualize the material as reality, as we've discussed, which I don't believe is. And that's the gross reality. We'll talk about that. That's the gross reality,
yes.
The material, your body, your flesh, your blood, planets, stars, things like that. Spiritual stuff would be more that in which we cannot touch or show people. So, your own emotions, personal world, your daydreams are all part of your spiritual world. I mean, when you say getting in the spirit of things, when somebody's having a celebration or a holiday, we know what that means.
Yes.
It's not a tangible thing, but there's something there. So spirit really is more of a term for intangible things that I think we can all acknowledge are really real. And that's back to the conversation we were having earlier. I think that's what's really real is our spiritual experience. I mean, it's so tangible to us as individuals. And I do believe that there's a lot of different spiritual philosophies and modalities, but when you start to look at a lot of different things, and even science, you start to see huge layers of overlap.
Yes.
And I think that, taking the time, I think, to just make yourself an aware individual. So I think learning stuff is really the key. And I think that the other key is not letting information supersede inspiration. I think one cannot replace one for the other. I think you have to have both. And I think that acquiring information cannot supplant having inspiration for things. But I think that learning, I mean, again, like I said, a lot of people would think spiritual education would require like maybe going to a church or going to a Buddhist temple or something. But I think that, again, with the availability of information on the internet and stuff, you can teach yourself about not only like what is traditionally called spiritual stuff, but if you study philosophy, psychology, geometry, even math. I mean, the ancient Greeks really believed that God was in math and geometry. Or you even study like quantum physics. And again, you don't have to be like a super scientist to go read about this stuff. There's a lot of it broken down into relatively simple terms, sometimes in news articles about it.
Or YouTube videos.
And if one has not the relative scientific understanding to grasp some of that, then maybe you should go take a couple of adult education courses on some physics or some, chemistry or something. I mean, I think back to what I was getting at, which is, I think educating yourself about anything, sports, psychology, sociology, engineering, any of that stuff leads to mastery.
Yes.
And if you master things, the lessons are transferable. And I find that that's one of the biggest spiritual experiences in life is the more things you learn about, the more transferable information you develop and apply in other realms. And back to music being really magical is all the lessons you learn in music are infinitely transferable everywhere. And it's really a beautiful thing. And for me lately, my personal spiritual journey has literally been embedded in music. So,
yeah.
It's kind of fun. But, I think that choosing to expose yourself to different ideas and perspectives and constantly educate yourself and be curious is really the crux of spirituality. I think that's the spirit of humanity is curiosity, adventure, exploration. I mean, it's very trite, but to boldly go where no man has gone before,
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that the human species as a whole is going through a consciousness shift or a spiritual shift at this time? I mean, that's a very popular opinion right now. Do you think that that's what's happening?
Well, I personally see in my day-to-day life, I mean, just look at it's only superficial, but the pervasiveness of awareness of the inequities in our food system and in our global situation, in our government. I mean, even look at this current presidential election. I don't really know many people who really support either of these mainstream candidates or who don't have a lot of reservations if they do.
Right.
I mean, you literally have our entire country and the entire world going like, are you fucking kidding me? This is a complete shit show. These are complete buffoons. Like, I'm sorry, I don't have to agree with everything for a candidate, but like, I would like the next president of my country, even if he's not someone I agree with or she's not someone I agree with, even if I mostly don't agree with them, I would like to not feel embarrassed that they represent our country to the world, for starters. And you're looking at two candidates right now as front runners that are completely embarrassing. And that seems to be the consensus. It doesn't seem to be some radical, you're just one of those, liberal, radical, you don't think inside the box kind of people. You talk to pretty much anybody and they're going to give you some feedback of some sense of this. And I asked you, do you not see that, or is that just me?
Oh, no, I completely see it. Although my view is a little more far-reaching, and I sort of get blank stares from people. I had this argument with my mother the other day. It seems that she does this every 4 years. I called her, and she immediately started in with the, make sure you vote for Hillary because not voting for Hillary is giving a vote to Trump, and we can't have him in. He's going to screw everything up. And she's very much still trapped in that duality of there are Republicans and Democrats, and the Republicans are evil. I'm trying to explain to her that they're two sides of the same coin. You have just as much of a chance as disaster under Clinton as you do under Trump. I mean, and then the whole thing about voting, the whole thing about voting is, well, you got to vote. If you don't vote, then you don't have a right to complain. But see, that's all assuming the premise that voting actually matters, that your individual vote still counts for something, which I don't believe it does. I really believe that the system as it has existed for the last 240 years is broken. It's just irrevocably broken.
Let's really get back to you really dug yourself in a hole here, buddy. See, let's really get back to it, and let's really think about some of the things that I think, no matter whether you're conservative, liberal, or anything, if you have some sense of agreement with the principles this country are founded on, some of the biggest principles this country are founded on that are still applicable today, and I think very undebatable, are some of the senses of state individuality. Now, I know we've federalized a little more over time, and that's really important on a certain level, but state individuality, focus on state and local government, and a sense of smaller, more manageable government is very important, and the freedom of the individual when it doesn't infringe on the freedom of other individuals. And these are all very important things, and then you have the dynamic of there's this overinflated sense of importance upon who's the fucking president of the United States. And I know it's a really important job, but guess what? You know what really impacts your life? Voting on your state and local referendums.
Agreed.
Voting on your state and local officials. Guess what? That is going to have a direct role.
Right.
Your congressmen and senators also have more of an impact about the federal laws being passed than the president. The president, one of the biggest things the president does other than act as a diplomat between states and the diplomat between the United States and other governments and as a big, basically corporate manager, is he appoints Supreme Court justices. Is one of the most impactful things that a president does.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he sets the tone, and I know he picks his cabinet, which is also very important. The cabinet is very important. But the idea that the president is our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, in a political sense, is fucking cockamamie and bullshit. The thing they are going to do this and they're going to do that is just a big smoke and mirrors bullshit thing.
Agreed.
That we're not having a conversation that makes any sense. First of all, the president doesn't have that far-reaching ability, checks and balances, folks. Number two, it's the federal fucking government. We need to pay a little more attention to our state and local governments. By the way, there's a large embattlement of states right now with the federal government. A lot of it's going on. It was going on around gay rights issues. Finally, we've started to ban around that banner. But now these marijuana laws, medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, and also industrial grade hemp, is being in big embattlement between state and federal government. On top of, there's dozens of issues that have been going on for decades with a bunch of states with the federal government, and a lot of people don't know this outside of those states or those political scenes, and it's pretty ridiculous to think that we need to be focusing on who the president is instead of focusing on who our state and local officials are and hoping that our state is going to bat for us, because we've got an overgrown federal government that acts as a front for the federal banking system cartel and the corporations that are like, we live in a capitalist society. Money rules all, and if you don't think so, you're really foolish and ignorant. And again, allowing our attention to be on this thing in this way, and I'm not saying don't go vote, and I'm not saying, that we should be happy with these choices. We need to have a conversation about the choices we're being offered here, because they're fucking retarded, and you should edit that out. Please. They're just fucking foolish, and we need to not be, like I said, as complacent in this process. But I also think that it shouldn't be every 4 years we rally around the presidential candidate. I mean, it's the amount of time and attention given to these presidential candidates is, I think,
it's sickening.
Sickening, and it's disproportionate. Like, if we gave 1/10 of that energy to our state and local officials, we would have better minimum wage laws, better bottle redemption laws, better work labor laws, better, social justice laws, like whatever. Everything that matters really happens on a state and local level. I mean, again, look at the gay marriage rights. Look at the civil rights movement in the 60s. Look at women's suffrage. Look at ending prohibition. Look at even creating prohibition. It all happened at a state and local grassroots level, and then it percolated to the federal level. Like, real change in this country is not going to happen from the top down. And if it does, it's going to get fucked up. Look at Obamacare.
Right. Well, this was my
had created a universal statewide healthcare system that was way better than the federal one for half a decade in my state before the federal one took over. And the federal one took over, I went from paying nothing to $25 a month for great health insurance to now I pay $250 to $300 a month for okay health insurance. Right.
Well, this was my argument with my mother.
I paid like $5,000 a year more than I did the year before I paid $25.
Yeah. And
it had better health insurance.
This was my argument with my mother, when Obama was elected last time, and she kept, Obama, we got to vote for the Democrat, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, Mom, we need radical changes. We can't deal with these sort of duct taping solutions to things. There are some serious radical changes that need to be made. And I told her, Obama is not going to do that. Whoever is in there, they're not going to make the necessary radical systemic changes that we need to fix some of these problems. Obamacare is a perfect example. I mean, it doesn't really fix anything.
But what I'm trying to say to you is those radical changes aren't going to happen by a president.
Oh, I
That's
agree.
What I'm trying to say.
Agree.
Those radical changes are going to happen when there's a mass call for that to happen.
Right. But see, that's the federal government. Their whole agenda now with the NSA and the spying and the squashing of the protests, like the Occupy movement, is they're trying to prevent that from happening. Every time the people become a little bit more aware and angry and demand change, then the government just comes down hard on them.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. The genie's out of the bottle. The world we're living in is shrinking ever so fast. Like, this ISIS bullshit, this North Korea bullshit. I'm sorry, like, people are living in, like, this stuff is going to continue. It's like, it can only continue so fucking long.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this shit, like, I don't know if we'll see in our lifetime, but, like, we are on trajectory for this stuff to, like, have to work itself out. It just has, like, and I say that with, like, I am not a cupcakes and rainbow kind of person. I'm a very realistic person. But I just don't see the way that the world is shrinking right now due to the interconnectivity of the internet and the availability of information and the evolution of technology, that, like, this shit can keep going on. I mean, it's just like a couple of decades from now, this shit is going to be like next to a memory. I really do feel. I just don't feel like, as backwards as those parts of the world are, that things can continue to go down that rabbit hole. And I think it's the same thing with us. It starts us here in this country and the other first world countries where, we've got, like, so much available in the way of technology and infrastructure that it's just like I said, it's like, yeah, I mean, you like to think that, you know, like, yeah, the NSA, FBI, CIA, they're not these evil monsters groups like we try to paint them out to be, but they're also not really nice guys either.
Yeah.
They do a lot of fucked up shit, and like a lot of it is based on trying to socially control our country. And I think it's, you know, just a simple act of self-preservation.
Yeah.
You know, for the whole governmental structure that exists right now, because I do really think that our country was designed to constantly ratify itself, and it's trying to do so. I mean, it's just really like we want to do so. Like we want to, you know, say no. Like I want my freedoms. I want my ability to be who I am, and I think that, you know, like I said, we still, you know, as much as people worry about these movements, quote unquote, getting stopped, they still are happening on those grassroots levels where they can't be stopped, where you and I are having a conversation and having intelligent ideas. We're not having a protest, and I'm not saying that protests are bad. I think that we might need more of them at times. Civil unrest is important at times, but I also think that the bigger part that has been missing for a long time is intelligent, calm-minded discussions. And I'm not saying you can't be emotional about these things, but you can't be acting emotional. Like, you have to stay calm and not polarize the conversation. Like, I may not agree with you, but let's talk about it.
Sure.
Let's have some intelligent discourse. Like, come on. And like, I think that that's one of the big problems with back to politics is people are like, we don't talk about politics and religion and shit. Like, why not? What, because you're an asshole and you can't stay calm? Or because you have to hold on to your ideas? You can't try on another set of ideas for 5 minutes?
Well, that's the biggest.
This is right?
You nailed it. That's the problem I noticed.
Believe for 5 minutes? Can you challenge some of the things that you believe?
Yeah,
like if you can't do that, you've got a problem.
Seriously, and that's what I find the most with people is I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm just asking you to entertain a contradictory thought and just consider it. That's all. It is possible to hold two completely contradictory thoughts in your mind and not have to choose one over the other. It's just part of having an open mind.
Oh, there's plenty of things I vehemently disagree with that I've taken the time to really try it on multiple times in my life, like just put myself in other people's headspace. And not that I can't put myself in there enough to be like, yeah, I don't know what it's like to be them, but I can kind of see that point of view. But a lot of times I'm still like, I don't really agree with that point of view. I think it's a little wacky, and this is why. But I've taken the time to real serious time and effort to put myself in that headspace as best as I can, and I think, like, you know, a good idea is like talking from different political points of view. You know, like look at this gun issue. A lot of people want more regulation with guns. A lot of people don't want more regulation with guns. I personally vacillate between both sides of those arguments and a lot of those conversations.
Yeah.
Because I do believe that the right to bear firearms shouldn't be as limited as it is, but at the same time, I do kind of agree with some people saying, hey, at least, like, get people, like, one of the most recent ideas I heard that made a lot of sense was the idea of like, just making, like, some form of training more mandatory.
Sure.
And maybe demonstrate proficiency. And I think that if that was the only limiting factor, other than maybe you've never committed a gun crime, I think that, you know, I think that's acceptable. But I think that if you've committed a gun crime, you shouldn't potentially not be able to. But I think anything outside that, even other crimes, I think that, like, honestly, like, why shouldn't you be able to carry a gun? Why shouldn't you be able to defend yourself? Because I think that's one of those humanized things is we try to make it out that everything's fine and safe and, like, we have to rely on the police to protect us. But this is one of my things with gun advocacy is why shouldn't you have the right to protect yourself?
Yeah, I know. I just view that as a symptom of our times. Like, again, my ideas are so far-reaching. Like, guns and weapons, it's like money. Eventually, we're gonna have to get past money and get past having guns and weapons. And so, yeah, you have the right to bear arms now because we live in this society where there are weapons and there are sick people out there. But eventually, it's got to go. Eventually, we're not going to... What was
I just saying, though, about the like, situations in the Middle East or the situations we deal with our government? It's just kind of works the way out, right?
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. I think that. I'm sorry. I mean, I hate jumping, but like your point to my point, like this is. I think when you stand back and look at the way the waves are rippling, it just seems like the tide's going in a direction here, and it's like only a matter of time.
Yes.
It seems as though.
Yes. Well, everything is temporary.
Like hyper feared person where you're stuck in this fear mongering place where you just can't. Get out of your own head. Like I don't know. Yeah.
I have this poem. Here's a line from my poems. One of my favorite lines that I've written. Are you familiar with John Lennon's song "God"?
No. Go ahead.
Well, so John Lennon wrote a song called "God," and then U2 at one point did a song called "God Part 2." So I wrote a poem called "God Part 3," and the line in it is, "Don't believe religion, don't believe in law. Governments and prophets, man, are always going to fall. Nothing lasts forever. Everything is transient. And so the state of things the way they are now, it's not going to stay this way." I mean, just look at the 20th century. At this, 100 years ago, 1916, World War II or World War I was ending. That is so radically different than where the 20th century ended up. Why do we think that things are going to be even remotely the same as they are now at the end of this century? Especially because things are seem to be moving faster, and these changes seem to be occurring at a more exponential rate.
Well, I mean, it's really simple. Again, back to the rate of technological evolution combined with our striving to keep up with the technology because we're so adaptable is really it. I mean, everything is, if you listen to Robert Anton Wilson or Terence McKenna, they talk about these asymptotic curves, and that's what's going on. I mean, where literally, there's a biological evolution, and then there was technological evolution. Human evolution, technological evolution started with language, and quickly society formed, and now society evolves to the point where we've created technologies that are now outside of society and evolving so fast that we're struggling to keep up. Look at, like, the ability to modify genetics right now. I mean, we don't even know what to do with some of this new genetic modification technology that actually is genetic modification that I can get behind because it's very concise. Even though we don't know what we're doing now, once we figure out a little bit more, we'll be able to use it concisely once we know what we're doing with it. Whereas before, genetic modification, most people don't know this, is you're bombarding genes with viruses and bacteria and hoping the code you want lands where you want the genetic code.
Yeah.
Just so we can discuss how haphazard it's been. And now there's this chitting or something like that they call it. I'm not sure of the name, but it's supposed to be like they can go in and tweak specific parts of DNA concisely. Yeah,
it's called CRISPR. It's an acronym.
Yeah, there you go. That's exactly it. Thank you. But yeah, I mean, we don't even know. Like, I mean, there was a huge scientific symposium, and nobody's really worried because everybody's like, we don't even know what the fuck to do with this. I mean, we're just going to hold on to this.
Well, I think that we're on the cusp of redefining what it means to be human, basically. I mean, I think that in the next 100, 200 years, human beings as we know them are going to be radically different. I mean, gender boundaries are going to completely dissolve. We might have just gender neuter. I'm not exactly sure where it's going to go, but the human being as it exists now is going to be radically different. We may not even be in physical forms as we understand them to be right now. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do see that happening. I mean, some people talk about maybe a cybernetic emergence, whether it be done like by people putting VR helmets, downloading their consciousness into machines, or actual prosthetics and stuff like that. But we're definitely headed toward something.
Well, right now,
there's so many factors right now that it's kind of mind-bending. You've got AI, you got virtual reality, you've got 3D printing, you've got genetic modification,
teleportation. They've successfully teleported particles, using quantum non-locality. shit's about to get very, very interesting.
Yeah. Hopefully I don't, teleport my arm in the wrong space.
Yeah, seriously. All right, well, listen, on that note, I have to go. This has been an excellent conversation. I hope we'll do this again.
Of course.
Of course. Now, where can people find you if they're interested in looking you up or contacting you?
Me?
Yeah, you.
I don't have any outlets right now. I disbanded some of my original stuff when I had some intellectual property associated, a website and blog associated with my farming practices, but I've actually discontinued that and have been focusing on the practical side of my farming endeavors. So I guess that's to be announced, because at some point in the near future, in the next year, I do plan on having some kind of website or blog back up to do with farming and food.
Okay.
So that's going to be an outlet where there will be an email attached, but as of right now, there is nothing. I am a ghost. So they'll have to wait for our next podcast with bated breath.
Sounds good. We'll have you on the next
Hopefully
round.
by that time, I'll have some intellectual property up in a virtual identity that people can contact and interact with. But unfortunately, unless you know me personally, there's no way to get a hold of me.
Okay. Well, that might be good. Less
But
distraction for you.
There's going to be, like I said, I hope to have some kind of educational and consultational thing for people interested in learning about agriculture, food preparation, amateur nutrition that I know about, because there will be a lot of information associated with whatever virtual domain I create. I just, like I said, unfortunately had to sum it up, when I started this, I had a couple of people working with me, and I'm doing this completely solo right now, so I had to consolidate and focus on what's on the ground, because that's the most important and longest developing part of this. Something in the virtual realm I can put together in a matter of weeks.
Sure.
Not to disappoint your listeners.
Oh, no, not at all. And, like I said, you're hopefully going to come down in a month for Kingmanstock, so hopefully we can do this face-to-face.
Yeah. And you need to take a vacation up to Cape Cod. I've got a room for you and Nikki and Devon. So
that'd be great.
Get your asses up here. Come up here and
definitely.
We can set up a website then.
Sounds good.
For listeners.
All right, Anthony. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate you being on.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to talking again soon.
All right. One love.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
A specific thought thread. You don't remember where we ended it, huh?
I'm not sure I remember what I did yesterday. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, I don't remember what I did 5 minutes ago.
Exactly. When you're in the moment, there's only this moment.
You see, getting these moves.
If it's crawling up your leg, it's a disease.
Okay, that's a good.
And you just, sometimes I've just done this kind of thing and you just shake and it will fall out.
Okay, alright.
Sometimes you just my friend Bob who lives in the street from me is he got stung in the nutsack. He got stung in the penis. He said when he got stung in the nutsack, it shriveled up to nothing, like a little raisin.
It's horrible.
When he got stung in the penis, he's like, I had an erection for a really long time. But I guess it hurt really bad.
Testicular torsion? What are you talking about?
No. Bee sting on the genitals.
But not on the ball sack, on the penis. That's the secret, as long as you can handle the pain.
But I think it varies from individual to individual.
Yeah.
And also the pain, everything is temporary, right?
Right.
But the pain is the least of it. It's 3 to 5 days of intense itching.
Oh, God.
It itches
really? No,
crazy.
fuck that.
when I got stung in the nose, a bee flew in my nostril.
Oh.
Right?
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm like, you know what? It's weird. Like, I basically thinking these thoughts, like, if I just remain calm, she'll crawl back out. If I exhale strongly through the nostril that she's in, she'll come out and she won't sting me.
Okay.
But instead, I panicked, and all of this happened in like less than a second. Although all of those thoughts and my decision to like, fuck this, I need this thing out of my nose. I don't care what happens. So I just fucking pinched her out, and she stung me right there.
Damn.
For a few moments, I was like, I'm gonna die. Like, I don't know, I can't see anything. Like transcendental. Like,
It was that bad, huh?
I forgot about everything else in my life except for the fact that I had fucking just been stung in the face. And then a few minutes later, I'm like, okay, I'm still standing. My neighbor's over there having a cookout. I'm really embarrassed. I'm not going to tell them I just got stung in
Is
the
that the first time
face.
you'd ever been that, like in that state?
That's a good goddamn question.
No.
Like, wait,
Well,
like,
I mean,
you forgot
that
about everything else
specific-
except for it was in the present moment, and you're
No,
just like, oh
no,
shit.
that's not the first time, but that's why I love bees, because they bring me back there. Every time I get stung, I'm like, ah, okay, and they make me slow down. They make me think about what I'm going to do before I do it, and they make me live in the moment, because if I'm not in the moment, like the last time I went in the hive, I was like, there's a wasp robbing the hive, I'm going to video this, and I got all excited about not being in the moment, and I got fucking slammed.
Right, like the lesson is instant. Jeez.
They don't like it when I'm stoned. I don't smoke before I go in. I'm like not sober because I smoke constantly, so I'm always a little bit high, but like, and they're all about smell too. If they can smell me, and if I have any fear in me, they're like, zap.
That's amazing.
I forgot what started that, but yeah. And I got stung on the third eye by like, what do I'm going to paint on this hive, and I'm hanging out next to the hive, like asking them. So there are races of honeybees. These are Italians.
Okay.
Those are the most common, like, they store a shit ton of honey. They're supposed to be nice. Mine are not particularly nice. At least that one hive. There's a new queen now. Eloise is gone. Eloise II has replaced her.
What happened to Eloise?
She reproduced. She swarmed.
Okay.
So when the hive gets like full enough, the old queen will take a bunch of bees with her and leave.
Right.
And then they will build a new queen with their royal jelly, and she will breed with, and she'll go to the drone zone and breed. And I just had a conversation about this, and I feel like it was not with you, it was with Jay Barnes. So you,
It's okay.
I feel like I'm repeating myself.
Deja vu, sorry.
And then the new queen will return to the hive. She stores all that sperm. When the male bee has sex with the female bee, his penis gets ripped out of his body, and he's fulfilled his purpose in life and dies.
Yeah.
And then a fertilized egg makes a worker, which is a female, and an unfertilized egg makes a drone, which is a male.
Okay.
And the cycle continues. So if you think of the hive as the organism, it's like an immortal being.
Sure.
It just keeps going.
Sure, absolutely.
And they're in pretty perfect balance with this planet anyway. I mean, they don't kill anything. They can kill something, and they do sometimes, but they don't have to kill to live.
Okay.
Like most other beings on this planet. They eat pollen and nectar. need to live. They have a symbiosis with plants. They need plants to survive, but they help plants reproduce.
Sure.
So,
Is it true that they do a dance to indicate where
The waggle
food is?
dance,
The
yeah.
waggle dance, that's true.
and it's in an infinity pattern.
Oh, okay, alright.
I don't really understand it that much, but they will like they vibrate, they shake
Right.
their ass, and then whatever the orientation of the infinity is, like the direction, and the
Where the-
length of it is like how far away it is, or something
Yeah.
like that, compared to the sun.
Right, that's crazy.
Yeah, and they wake up knowing what to do. So it's like a maggot, right? The honeycomb. There's a maggot living in that honeycomb, and then eventually it transforms into a bee,
Right.
and it chews its way out, and is born, and then when it's born, it's like fuzzy and really cute and yellow, and it is a nurse bee, and it takes care of the other maggots. As soon as it
So that's his
hatches.
first job.
Yeah. And then it becomes like, I can't remember all the fucking jobs that they have, but the last job is to be a field bee, where you collect pollen and nectar, and you fly out and you understand what that waggle dance means, and you go to that source and get that food.
Wow.
And you've been selectively bred by humans to store extra honey and be extra gentle, and so like they're hoarders. Like my bees give me so much honey, and I like.
Okay, that brings me to my next question then. So, what's with the depopulation of the bees?
It's pesticide use.
Everything.
People's lawns, golf courses, like our society, and how we want to have like perfect landscaping, no weeds. Like it's lack of habitat. It's like nature will be fine if we just get the fuck out of the way.
So it's wild bees that are diminishing.
No, it's all of them.
All of them.
Because we're poisoning everything.
What about Wi-Fi signals? Is that true?
No, I don't. Well, I don't know.
Does that interfere with
Maybe.
their...
I feel like it's more just pesticides, and I feel like it's all kind of. We have to be more conscious of what we're doing and what it affects. You know, like. I can't think of an analogy.
What are you trying to think of an analogy for?
Like, the problem with the bees is not Wi-Fi, but like habitat destruction, poisoning the food that they eat, and that's pretty much
what we're doing with everything.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
well, that's what
it's
I'm
everything.
saying, and I feel like the Wi-Fi thing is not necessarily directly the problem, but like the attitude behind that. Like I need everything now, and I deserve it now, and
I understand what you're saying.
you notice
I do. Yeah.
most of the litter is like if you're driving down the street and you're looking at the trash that people throw out of their cars, it's like McDonald's trash, and like I shouldn't complain. I'm just. It takes me a little while to adjust. You know, when I first moved to Somerville, which is near Boston, we lived right next to a highway, and I was like, I couldn't sleep because the cars were so loud. And then a year later, I moved into my dad's house, and I couldn't sleep because the frogs were so loud.
So you need complete silence?
No. I just need to adjust to the noise.
So whatever the background.
Yeah, like eventually the highway became soothing to me, and I couldn't sleep without it.
Because that random set that.
Yeah, it's like white noise. Yeah. And then the peepers is the same thing, but it's like when you're used to cars, peepers are like deafeningly loud, and it takes a couple days to get used to it.
Yeah, this can help.
Sure.
I need help making the song right. You know how to do it, right?
You know how most people listen to white noise or pink noise?
I don't know about pink noise. I don't know that song yet.
If
you want to destroy my sweater, thread.
whoa, hold this thread
As I walk away.
As I walk away.
Watch me unravel. I'll soon be naked, lying on the floor.
Lying on the floor.
I've come undone. That sounds right.
If you want to destroy my sweater.
Pull this thread.
No, you gotta go whoa, whoa, whoa.
Oh, I didn't know it was supposed
You're
to
the
be
backup
backup singing.
singer.
We were
Yeah.
talking about Pink
I need
Floyd.
help.
I'm distracted.
What's your advice for people in life?
My advice is to stay strong, be helpful, be smart, be brave, be powerful, be kind, and be loving to everyone, even your pets. Let's say something bad happened to you. Move on. It already happened. Just move on to the better things in life. What a heck of time!